Good afternoon, friends. This is Jimmy Doane coming to you from the dining room, and this is January 24th, 2016. This is another little rant we have on the oil crisis, if you want to call it that. Actually, this is Venezuela, one of the things that we used to do in the Jimmy Doane Show, and if you want to, you can go to jimmydoane.com, where we have, I guess, 200 podcasts over the last 10 years, where we discuss many of these things. And if you get a chance, you'd want to share some of this stuff. It would be a big help. We're going to try and monetize this whole thing at some point. Anyway, this is and what we used to have was a Hugo update, and there's a little theme song which my editor may put in here every time we would have a Hugo update on what was going on in Venezuela. And of course, what's happened now is it's Maduro, who has, since Hugo died, Maduro has taken up the mantle here of dictatorship, and they do have I guess a Congress down there, but apparently they can be overruled by Maduro. Anyway, the big news was, and this actually dovetails into another story we're going to talk about later, is that just recently, the Congress, as happened here when the Republicans took over in 2012, I guess it was, but in spite of it, different from being a spineless takeover like as they did here with Republicans, taking over both the House and the Senate, and then just folding like a cheap suit. The Congress, now the new Congress, opposition Congress, if you want to call it that, has flatly told Maduro, you cannot have emergency powers. They have said amid the plunging national economy, Maduro wanted to have a 60-day dictatorship for it, basically, that I could do anything. And of course, there's no such thing as a temporary dictatorship. Once you give that guy the power, expanded authority for 60 days, I'm sorry, it never ends, because there's just too much cronyism that can go in there. Anyway, ruling party and opposition lawmakers accused each other of trying to run the country into the ground in the first major congressional debate Venezuela has had in more than a decade. So Maduro had proposed an emergency decree that would give him expanded authority for 60 days, I said that, and the opposition argues that Maduro is responsible for raging inflation and chronic shortages, dogging daily life here and promising to oust him within 6 months. Now, I don't know exactly how they do that. It's run. The way the government is set up is a little different from down there. I guess they have to have some kind of a presidential election, and I don't know how that works exactly. But what's interesting is that they blame him, but essentially it's always, as it always is, it's the central bank, and here's why. The South American, the debate took place against a backdrop of more grim economic news, as the IMF that's the International Monetary Fund, predicted that inflation in Venezuela would more than double in 2016, reaching 720%. Now that means that I don't know, whatever it is, whatever you have now that's worth $100 is going to be worth $14 inside of this year. And the South American nation already suffers from the world's highest inflation in a crushing recession. Now, this is something that we experienced in this country on a much milder level in the late 70s. I remember this, and starting in about 74, and this is right after we went off the gold standard and so forth, it was a crushing, what they called, for the first time ever, stagflation. Well, this was an anomaly that had never occurred to Keynesian economists, because they said it was impossible that the central bank had control. It was supposed to be responsible for jobs and inflation, and if one went up, the other went down, and they could adjust, fine-tune and adjusted other way around by expanding the money supply or contracting or whatever they do. Well, what happened in the 70s was they both went south, and they were in consternation. They said, well, who would have seen this coming? Well, there were a lot of people that saw it coming, and most notably the Austrian school, Ludwig von Mises and people like that, saw it coming on the horizon. Murray Rothbard and a lot of the people that were of the Austrian school said it had to come, and it did. And of course, the only reason it ended, what was interesting about this, the only reason it ended was Carter appointed Volcker, 6'6", gigantic Volcker, as head of the Federal Reserve. And what he did was to clamp down on the money supply. He stopped it. Basically, we had a massive contraction. We went into the worst depression since the 30s, since 29, the worst one since then. It was a dramatic drop. And it was right at the beginning of Reagan's administration. And I mean, it was really bad. I mean, there was interest rates went to 20%. I mean, I remember walking into the bank with, you could get a 90-day note or 90-day T-bill that would pay you, 18%, for God's sakes. Well, obviously that couldn't last. And in a year and a half or 2 years later, the excesses that had been built up with the malinvestments had been washed out of the system because Volcker did not give up. And by 1984, we had a roaring economy, and that's one of the reasons that Reagan was, he asked the question, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? And, he won like 40 or 49 states. So it can be done. It was done in this country also, as I've mentioned before, in the 1920 recession, I think it was Harding that refused to, he chopped the government money supply and everything. He did the same kind of thing. So anyway, Maduro is trying to revive, I guess, the free market part, if you want to call that what's left of the government, the economy down there, and he approved a change that will allow the country small export sector to use more favorable currency exchange rate, which means the official exchange rate down there, I don't know, is like 6 or 7 or 10 bolivars to the dollar, but at the black market, which is like 600 or 700, I mean, I don't know what the exact numbers are, but it's needless to say, there's a thriving black market on this stuff, and that's what governments have to do. They have to outlaw the competition on anything in order to have their way done. And of course, one of the things I've always asked is, if you have to use a gun to enforce something, is it really fair? I mean, is it something that's good if you have to use a gun? And that's what would happen if the policeman down there caught you exchanging dollars for I think it's bolivars, on a side street. They would arrest you. I mean, and they have a gun, so that's another thing. Anytime you have a gun in the equation, there are always problems. So they have an argument with the activists. We see this kind of stuff all the time. They're bent on the politics of sterile confrontation and irresponsible opposition. And of course, there's no way they're going to fix this thing. We're not closing any doors. And of course, the majority leader, this is of the opposition, says what we need is real change. Well, this sounds awfully familiar to what we were going to have in 2008, called Hope and Change. And that's one of the things I want to ask, in spite of the President's State of the Union bragging and gloating about how great things are in this country. I'm not so sure. As I said before, the quote prosperity, the market, the veneer prosperity has been bought by an extra $8 or $9 trillion in debt, which is going to have to be paid by your children and grandchildren and further progeny down the road. And it's not going to be pretty, because there's no way they have the ability to earn that kind of money. There are going to be massive defaults is what's going to happen. But that's another story. Thank you for listening, and share this with your friends on Facebook and YouTube. And also go to the jimmydoane.com website for maybe some comments on the day. And we'll see you on the next rant. Talk to you later. Thank you for listening.